is gracious once more. But still, 14,700 people are killed in the plague. And we have these stories. And Paul reminds us of these things that happened. And he tells us these things didn't just happen, but they happened and they are recorded for us for a reason. He tells us in chapter 10, verse 11, that they happened as examples for us. They're examples for us to follow. They're a pattern of warning written down to instruct us. That's one of the reasons we have our Old Testament still today. We have the Old Testament for a reason. You know, I talk to people from time to time, and they tell me, well, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the Old Testament. I've got my New Testament. I got the words of Jesus, and that's enough. My response to them is, if you are reading the New Testament without knowledge of the Old Testament, you're probably not understanding a whole lot of what you're reading in the New Testament. Because it's there for a reason. It completes the picture. It gives us those examples. Think about it like this. Think about it like only seeing the last half hour of a movie. Did you ever watch a movie and you get toward the end, the part where good things really start happening, and you just want to watch it, and someone comes in the room who hasn't seen the rest of that movie? Guys, if your wife or girlfriend's ever done this to you, and you want to pull your hair out. Why? Because you know what's coming. They sit there nicely and quietly, and they can kind of piece together the action there a little bit of what's happening, but then they start to get this look in their face, and you just roll your eyes because you know. And then it comes, well, who's that? Why is he going there? Wait, isn't that the good guy's daughter? What's she doing? And you just want to watch this movie, but they keep asking you all these questions. Why are they asking questions? Because they didn't see the first part. That stuff still matters. It makes sense. It means something. And that's what our Old Testament is like for us. Paul tells us it has meaning. It's there as an example, a warning to instruct us on how to live in the kingdom of God. And as we read the stories about the people who in their hearts are divided because of their freedom with God, we better take note of that. When we read of the destruction brought onto themselves by their divided hearts, we better take warning. If we think we are standing firm, we better watch out. As Paul puts it, if you think you're standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. Paul's message is for those who are confident. He reminds us of the Israelites. Some of those Israelites, they were confident in their following of God, but yet they had divided hearts. Sometimes we in the church, we've been doing church and the Christian life for so long, we think there's no way possible I can be holding back anything from God. There's no way my heart is divided. You know, I come to church every week and Sunday school and Bible study. We do special events and I read my Bible regularly and I'm praying regularly. There's no way there's anything divided in my heart away from God. That's when Paul tells us to be warned. Be careful. Remember the words of Woody Allen, the heart wants what it wants. And it can be deceptive. We can have things in our hearts, desires deep down. We hide them from ourselves. We justify our motives. We try to explain them away before God. But really what we have is a divided heart. Now, I was telling David and Lauren a story last week that I thought would be appropriate to share. By the time I had a divided heart, it wasn't the first time in my life, and it wasn't the last time. But when I was in college, I'd been a follower of Jesus Christ at that point for 6 or 7 years. And I was really committed to my faith. But then word came down that George Lucas was going to make a new Star Wars trilogy. And it was going to be a prequel trilogy. And it was going to fill in the gaps and tell us how Luke's dad became Darth Vader. And so that was exciting. And I eagerly waited the day that I would be sitting with people all over the world watching those movies in a movie theater. But as the dates approached, I started to get a little bit nervous. What if Jesus came and took us all back to heaven before those movies came out? Wouldn't that be awful? So I began to hope in my heart that the Lord would tarry and he would just wait a little bit longer. Now, I look back on my life back then and I said, are you kidding me? I put this silly movie ahead of the desire to spend all eternity with God. Star Wars Episode 1 was really more important than the culmination of all history. I mean, it's ridiculous. But even though I'd been a follower of Jesus and was committed to my faith, I had a divided heart. Divided between a perceived something on this earth that would be pleasurable and then my relationship with God. And as a side note, I'm convinced that the Star Wars prequel trilogy turned out the way it did as a punishment toward me, so I'm so sorry for that. But back on track, I'm not the only one in this church today who is prone to letting silly things like that divide my heart. We're all capable of going down that path. And the scary, dangerous thing about it is we think it can't happen to us. We fail to heed the warnings given to us in the Old Testament. So we need to be careful because God's people can fall too. We can have divisions in our heart that we lie and we don't pay attention to, and they've been there for years. If we were to look to the examples of the Israelites in the Old Testament, we must notice that the divided heart against God brings consequences. A divided heart, it leads us to actions that take us away from God, that naturally bring a penalty into our lives. Like, for sometimes, like the Israelites, it's instant. They had their hearts divided, and there was a plague, there were some snakes there that killed some of them. But for most of us, most of the time, we don't even see the destruction we bring in our own life. We don't see the blessings, the benefits, the opportunities for joy and happiness that we would have received if our lives had been focused fully on God. We miss out. We want to be like the writer of Psalm 86 and cry out to God, give me an undivided heart. We must learn from the examples in the Bible, and we must crucially search our hearts. Search our hearts with truth. Solomon tells us in Ecclesiastes 9:3, the hearts of men are full of evil, and there is madness in their hearts while they live. We learn there that our hearts have evil in them, and they're mad, and they will deceive us, and they will hold things back from us. We won't even know that we have things in our hearts that are against God. That's why we have to be honest. That's why we have to be careful. That's why we need to search our hearts carefully. And that's scary, because when we do it honestly, we're afraid of what we might find. But we have examples from the past. We see in the lives of the Israelites an example of idolatry. I ask you today, is there something in your life today that divides your heart like that? Now, of course, we don't take gold and mold it into calves, or we don't have festivals to celebrate statues today, but we can be just as guilty of trying to remake God in an image that we like better. See, rather than devoting our hearts fully to the truths of the Bible, things that it tells us about God, we just go, we live our lives the way we want to, we do what we want to, and God will be all right with that because, well, we want Him to be, and He should be, because that's what we think God should be. The truths we read about in the Bible, about God, well, maybe they're not true if they become inconvenient or unpopular in our culture. No, that's rubbish. That's remaking God in our own fashion, and that's idolatry. So I ask you, is there any division of that in your heart today? We saw how the hearts of the Israelites were divided by lust. Is there any of that in you today? I talk of sexual lust, but I also talk about the lust for things, status, power, possessions. Is there anything in the world that you crave today as much or more than your relationship with God? If so, that's something that divides your heart. And don't be deceived. Don't let it exist there. We saw how the hearts of the Israelites continued to be divided by their own dissatisfaction and arrogance. Is there any of that in your heart today? Life didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, so I'll blame God. And I'll harbor resentment and bitterness. And because I know better, I would have done things differently. That's dissatisfaction. That's arrogance. Or, it's not the way I want it to be, so I'm not going to listen to what God says. I'm not going to listen to any wisdom He might give me from other people. That's arrogance. Be careful, because ideas can form like this in your heart, and you don't even know it a lot of times. So search your heart now. Is it divided by God and your own arrogance and dissatisfaction? You don't want to miss the blessings that God waits to pour out on your life when you have a heart that's fully devoted to Him. When you have a divided heart, that divided heart, it will take you right off God's path. So search your heart now today. Learn from the warnings. Be brave, be strong, and be honest with yourself. And get rid of anything in your heart that takes you away from that full service and devotion to God. Let's pray.